I wanted to examine whether or not legislative findings that we see in Voters First Act bills are legally sufficient or not. I saw a couple of bills affecting the California Voters First Act that was enacted by the voters in Prop 11 in 2008. And they always make the same legislative finding and declaration each bill. It's a rather simplistic statement. And to me, at least, it raises the question whether this type of language meets the requirements of Prop 11. Now, again, Prop 11 enacted the Voters First Act. It was an initiative measure approved by the voters November 4th, 2008, at the statewide general election. And it requires the Citizens Redistricting Commission to draw district lines for the election of members of the legislature and the Board of Equalization. In 2010, it added the members of the House of Representatives and Congress. Now, Prop 11 amended the California Constitution. It also added a number of sections to the California Government Code. And Section 4 of Prop 11 specifically added Chapter 3.2, commencing with Section 8251, to what is Division 1 of Title 2 of the California Government Code. And it says there that the legislature may not amend this chapter unless all of the following are met. And it sets forth 5 requirements. That the commission, that's the Citizens Redistricting Commission, recommends amendments to this chapter to carry out its purpose and intent. 2, that the exact language of the amendments provided by the commission is enacted as a statute by a 2/3 vote of each house of the legislature, and it must be signed by the governor. 3rd, that the bill containing those amendments is in print for at least 10 days before final passage by the legislature. 4th, that the amendments further the purposes of the act. And 5th and finally, that the amendments may not be passed in a year that's ending in 0 or 1. So Prop 11 is both a constitutional as well as a statutory initiative enacted by the people. And again, it allows the Act's statutory provisions in the government code to be amended by a 2/3 vote of the legislature, so long as, again, all 5 of those requirements specified in Prop 11, in fact, are met. Now, if you hearken back to Article 2 of the California Constitution in Section 10, Subdivision C, it says the legislature may amend or repeal a referendum statute, and the legislature may amend or repeal an initiative statute by another statute that becomes effective only when approved by the electors, meaning it has to go back to the ballot with a big unless the initiative statute permits amendment or repeal without the elector's approval. So this constitutional provision in Article 2 allows an initiative that was adopted by the state's voters to be amended by the legislature, like in this case, Prop 11, if that initiative permits amendment to it without the electorate's approval. Prop 11 does allow amendment by the legislature, assuming again those 5 specified requirements are met. So the legislature can amend Prop 11, and when it desires to do so, it includes at the end of the bill what we call a plus section, and it contains a legislative finding and declaration. Most recently, it simply says the legislature finds and declares that Section 1 of this bill furthers the purposes of the Voters First Act within the meaning of paragraph 4, subdivision C of Section 8251 of the Government Code. I raise the question whether the language in that example, just a simplistic statement that it furthers the purposes, is legally sufficient or not, or whether or not there should be some explanation of why the legislature believes that Prop 11's stated purpose or purposes are being furthered by this proposed amendment. Where are those stated purposes? They're contained in Section 2 of Prop 11. And it actually has in Section 2, it's titled Findings and Purpose. And it says that the people of the state of California make the following findings and declare their purpose in enacting this act. And then they specify 2 findings. Now, unfortunately, again, from my personal perspective, bills amending Prop 11 generally contain the simple statement that I read to you before. And those statements don't in any way explain why the legislature actually believes the proposed amendment furthers the purposes of the Voters First Act. Instead, the bill merely states the legislative finding and declaration and doesn't contain any further justification or explanation. Now, from my perspective, again, should those bills that propose amendments to Prop 11 include references, for example, to any of Prop 11's specified declarations or purpose? I think they should in order to withstand possible judicial scrutiny later on. This approach, again, by providing a short explanation, is the approach that we take with an urgency clause as well as special statutes. In this regard, if a court examines the urgency clause or the special statute finding, there's at least a short sentence or maybe even a full paragraph that explains why the legislature has determined that particular bill needs an urgency clause or why the bill qualifies as a special statute. I've seen some good examples in bills that amend California's AUMA, allowing adult use of cannabis. That was also an initiative statute, a statutory initiative that allows legislative amendment if it furthers the purposes of the AUMA. And in some of those bills amending the AUMA, they give one, two, three explanations as to why that finding and declaration that it furthers the purposes and intent of the AUMA is actually being met by the bill. So that leads me, of course, to my usual conclusion that bills that propose to amend Prop 11 should contain some sort of rationale why those proposed amendments, actually the further the purposes, so that if the legislation amending the act were to be challenged down the road in court, that judges would have a basis for understanding why the legislature made this determination that the bill properly amends Prop 11. So I think that the legislature should consider adding some explanatory language to their rather simplistic statements in these Prop 11 amendment bills under their consideration.